In the isolation and quarantine chart Public Health released for the general public, there are 3 categories, and according to COVID-19 Public Health Emergency Incident Commander Fernando Estevez, residents will ultimately fall into one of each, starting with those who aren't vaccinated.
If somebody is not fully vaccinated and they're a close contact, they have to quarantine for 10 days from the date of last exposure. So that's the simple part. That's if they're a close contact. If they're not fully vaccinated and they test positive and they feel symptomatic, then isolate for 10 days, and that's going to be discontinued 24 hours if they've had no fever after 24 hours without the aid of any medications.
Fever is the biggest tell to watch out for, so that means no fever-reducing meds and symptoms have improved to end your isolation. Estevez added those who aren't vaccinated but are asymptomatic, meaning they have no symptoms, all they have to do is quarantine for 10 days after they get tested. For those who are fully vaccinated but don't have the booster shot and are a close contact of someone who caught COVID,
we recommend that they quarantine for 5 days since the exposure of the last exposure, and that we also recommend that they get tested as well after 5 days. If somebody is fully vaccinated and not boosted and they've tested positive, and then if you look here, and then same consistent with all, that they're symptomatic, then they must isolate for 5 days since symptom onset.
Again, no fever-reducing meds can be used, and their fever and symptoms must have improved to end their isolation. Now, if residents are vaccinated and haven't gotten the booster but are asymptomatic, they must quarantine for 5 days after getting tested. For those that are fully vaccinated and boosted or are ineligible for the booster, they fall in the last category, including some manumco and children 4 or younger.
So if they're fully vaccinated and boosted or ineligible, if they're a close contact, we recommend that they just get tested after 5 days. There's no recommendation for quarantine if they're a close contact, and that's for the fully boosted.
If residents who are fully vaccinated and boosted test positive, they must isolate for 5 days since feeling symptoms, and if they have no fever and other symptoms have improved, they can end their isolation. For those asymptomatic, they must only isolate for 5 days. Estevez added the flowchart made by Public Health mirrors the one released by the CDC. The only difference is DPHSS modifies it to fit the ongoing COVID situation on the island. Daniel Perez reporting for Guam's News Network.